Well, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be today, and thank you for joining us for our monthly technical webinar series. We're going to get started here in just a minute, as I do see some people are still popping in for attending today's webinar. But before we get started, I want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, all call-in phones are automatically muted in order to preserve the quality of the audio for all of our attendees as well as for our presenters. Plus, we are recording this session as well too for distribution later. If at any time you have any questions during today's presentation, there is a questions box within the GoToWebinar screen. You can submit your questions, and time permitting, we're going to try to answer as many as possible. We also do receive some questions offline as well. That will bring us to our last housekeeping item, the follow-up. Because we know schedules change and some people can make it, some people can't, we are going to send a follow-up email to everybody who had registered and provide them with a link to the recording of the webinar if they want to share it with some clients or colleagues. We're going to give a copy of the presentation, and also all questions that receive both online and offline, we're going to provide answers to those and send those out to you as well too. We're going to go ahead and get started. I do see that there still are some people that are popping in for attendance today, but we're going to turn the presentation over to one of our senior level Unifier consultants, Mr. Kevin Hicks. Kevin, the floor is yours.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Hope we're having a pretty good day. My name is Kevin Hicks. I am a senior Unifier consultant or senior manager with D.R. McNatty. In today's webinar topic that we're going to be discussing, we are going to be going into a quick high-level overview synopsis of dealing with the concept of managing a project or program with your funding using Unifier, and some of the components that encompass this entire construction management process. You all have received, I am assuming, the invitation. And in terms of just a quick overview, I'll let you know, you deal with Unifier in terms of you may be looking to migrate from an existing project control system or starting brand new fresh with your enterprise. But the context of what we're going to talk about today is how Unifier provides a robust tool to manage your projects or your entire program that you can have set up within the system. We're going to talk about some of the options for managing your program, which may be fed through your project budgets, your contracts, and the pay application process, and the ways in which it can work within Unifier. I'm going to show you also some workflow routing design, conditional routing that you can set up based upon value or dollar thresholds within the system. You can make decisions based upon this. You can also have the system automatically make these decisions. And also, I'm going to show you some dashboarding and reporting capabilities that will allow you to round out and have a comprehensive cost management tool set for how you implement and use Unifier within your company or program. So, just a method of housekeeping for those of you who may or may not be familiar with Unifier. For those of you who are not, quick overview. Unifier is an integrated construction management system. You can use the system for a myriad of different things. Depending on your project size, you can use it for building processes, you can use it for vendors, bidding processes, and also Unifier is also, as you all know, since we're on the web, it's a web-based application accessible anywhere in the world. Just use Google Chrome, Firefox, or Microsoft Edge. Internet Explorer is really no longer supported. So in today's topic, I want to kind of discuss and talk about a theory before I start to go in here. The idea of how Unifier is becoming a industry benchmark for EPCM, EPC, and construction management companies consistently comes up at conferences and in our conversations. And how are the general capabilities, how will they work with accompanying software and construction methodology practices and the best way to go about that. So one of the biggest things to think about when you're looking at the benefits of Unifier is the construction management tool. Think about something of an important component of construction, which would be funding. So in my scenario, I'm going to kind of walk through and explain a project manager may work in conjunction with a scheduler to plan or schedule or control a large-scale program. You may have individual projects as well. And how do users manage their program by using their budgets? You're going to have linked to contract tracking with pay apps as well necessarily. And you can measure the actual project budget versus the planned project budget and quantify and measure spending at a granular level. And I'm going to go into that in some of the reporting today. So with these advantages, you're thinking of tracking funding, rules and controls. You have a connected CBS WBS structure, which I'm going to show as well, which comes from the native integration with P6, EPPM, that I'm going to actually show briefly here when I show some activity integration with the Tulare Street Undercrossing project that we're going to show today. I'm just quickly showing you some activities that are set up within P6. And also how that can be linked in Unifier, because you may have an activity in a schedule that may be linked to a contract or be the reason as to why a contract needs to be initiated or started. So having said that, several key takeaways I want you to think about as we walk through this today. Over 70% of organizations have issues where they don't have enough resources to meet incoming demand, so they need to manage their projects better with less people. And over 55% of organizations deal with ideas that their projects and resources are not well aligned with their business goals. How do we get everybody on the program or enterprise business goals? So being able to do that, what Unifier gives you, you're working with a centralized area of intake of data. You're able to optimize your project portfolio, and your organizations, all your projects become aligned with your business goals, and you can deliver on your initiatives, your strategic initiatives that you're wishing to execute. And also you're getting a top-down view of work and costs, which I'm going to show you as things roll up. And you can be very proactive in managing your project changes and risks. So having kind of set that as the baseline, or just that kind of the synopsis of the context of what we're going to discuss today, I'll go back into what I talked about. And I am logged into the Unifier system here, and I'm at the enterprise level. And for example, if we use California High-Speed Rail Authority, an example, as the enterprise, there's one of the most important projects that I talked about, or concepts with dealing with projects, which deals with funding. I just said I was at the enterprise level. So an organization such as California High-Speed Rail, or any company, most essentially would have something that we set up in Unifier called a fund sheet. So if I go into my fund sheet, you see the various funds that are available to my organization based upon the dollar amounts that I have put in. And we have different funds. You see the federal, so let's look at several funds here. We have the Federal Trust Fund, AARI Project Development Fund. We have one such as a Cap and Trade Construction Fund, and a bond fund such as Prop 1A, Project Development Phase 1. You set up your funding sheet within Unifier with funding codes, and you also can allocate the amount of funding that you would like the fund to have based upon your funding resources or funding that you are going to receive from a state or federal entity. Once you've set up your funding sheet, the funds that are set up in your company or enterprise funding sheets, these are the funds from which your projects may pull their funding from, or pull their allocated monies in order to fuel and feed your projects. Obviously, you have a project receives funding, then it has a budget that would be set up. Within this funding sheet is the basic setup of what you start to first to do to determine how your organization or how your funding is going to be done. Whereas there are also funding rules that can be set up as long as timetables and stipulations, but this is the preliminary area that's one of the first components of starting to manage your project and programs in Unifier if you're going to be using a funding component of that. Now, there are some areas behind this that deal with the setup, but I'm giving you kind of a high level before we start to go down into the detail. So as you can see, there are 3 funds that I'd like you to focus on here. I mentioned the Federal Trust Fund, AARA Project Development Fund, Cap and Trade Construction, and the Bond Fund, Prop 1A, Project Development Phase 1 Fund. All of these funds have substantial amounts of money within them at the enterprise level. So I will now close my company funding sheet, and I'm going to navigate to a particular project called the Tulare Street Undercrossing. And if I go to my Tulare Street Undercrossing, I see a basic dashboard that I've set up when I come in on my landing page. I'm going to come back to this, but I want you to shift your vision to the left side here, the left navigational nodes, and I'm going to go to an area called financial transactions, and I'm going to go to something called funding. Because in my example, one of the first things that a person may do, an individual, in setting up their project, they may say, hey, I've worked with my planner or scheduler or my finance department, and I have $100 million for this particular project to fund my project. So how do I pull in my funding that's been set up at the enterprise level and start to fund my project for the budget that I'm going to set up in order to execute my contracts within my project, and so forth and continuing on. So we have the ability, I'll go into, and for the sake of time and brevity, I've gone in and created these records in advance and gotten them to the final stages where they just need to be either sent to the end step, or I've completed them as well, because it would take too long to sit and pick through each one. If we look here at this fund appropriation CBS process, multiple funding sources for the Tulare Street Underpass to funding the cost code and where I'm deciding I'd like to give the money to. So if you can see the current project budget, 100 million, the funding as well. If we look at the line items, when I set up this particular fund or BP, I had the ability to choose from which fund I would like to derive my funding from, and also map that to a particular cost code or CBS code that has been brought in when you set up the cost sheet in Unifier. This CBS code or cost structure could come from a number of things. They could come from the P6 WBS if you wanted to use it, or you could also use it from a cost structure, maybe from your finance department or group. This code structure, if you can see here, it's selectable, is pulled in and set up based upon my cost sheet, which I will go to quickly here. And if I go to my project cost sheet, you see a series of CBS codes that are available here on the left side within the structure, with their cost categories or CBS items that have been set up. I could bring this CBS code, could be something that I want to bring in from a financial system such as PeopleSoft, or I could have that brought in through an integration, through a CSV upload through P6 if I wanted the P6 to govern my CBS or WBS code structure. So to go back to fund appropriation, to give you some context of how this works, you simply click Create. You would have the fund, and when you choose the line items, when you choose Add, you have the ability to choose which code from your project cost sheet, cost code with the CBS item. So as we can see in my record, I decided to give money to several cost codes, one of them being project construction management. And I decided I wanted to give that project construction managed money from one of the funding sources. In that process, project construction management, I chose the Federal Trust Fund ARA project development. You choose the fund, and then you are able to decide the amount that you would like to allocate to that particular cost category. I'll just simply close this. I'll go to the fund appropriation, which is the one that is pending. As you can see, you can see the cost code and the fund from which I'm pulling the money from. So I'm pulling $25 million from the Federal Trust Fund ARA project development. Cap and trade, I'm pulling $25 million from. And bond fund Prop 1A, I'm pulling $50 million from, for a total amount of my fund appropriation to be $100,000. This particular BP is at its final step. If I look at the workflow progress, I can see that it is under review. I send it to revision, I send it back to review, and now it's ready to be approved. And I'm going to simply approve this fund appropriation. And I now have an approved funding appropriation. So, having worked with my planner, project planner, my finance team, perhaps my scheduler, I may be the PM, I have gotten my funding approved for my project. I'm pulling it down from the funds that the finance department have determined. We've determined, yes, this is coming from here, this is coming from here, you're good to go. Funding has been approved. Now, one of the most straightforward things I may do is, most obviously, I would create a budget. So if I then move now here to my initial budget, I would look here at my initial budget. I have approved the budget, a record in terms of doing this for data purposes, so I'd be able to show it in the dashboard. So if I go to this particular process here, my initial budget for Tulare, you can see that I have approved my budget in the amount of $100 million. But when I approved my budget, I followed the logic of funding or approving the budget for the cost code or WBS items that the money was allocated to from the particular source. So when I approved the budget for the third-party contract work, cost code 020200, I approved it for $25 million, and so forth for project construction management and design build contract work along the same lines of the money that was approved as well and given to me in my fund appropriation. So I'm starting to want you all to see the correlation and the connection that I'm starting to make through the system of the data and how I'm going to tie this all together at the end, which is my dashboards and reporting. So now I have an initial budget that is approved in the amount of $100 million, and I have also approved funding for third-party contract work for cost code 02-02200 for $25 million, as well in my fund appropriation through, I know the name of the fund, the Federal Trust, AARA Project Development Fund. I gave this project $25 million from that fund, and then I also decided third-party contract work would be receiving the $25 million from that fund for this particular cost code, as well as the correlation for the other two cost categories in my initial budget. Now, I now have an approved budget. And there is one thing that I would like you to see here, and I'm going to go back to this budget and show. If we go to this budget and we go to the audit log, or we actually will look at the workflow process. And we're going to take a look at the graphic so that you can see a correlation between some of the conceptual, I guess you could say, conditional routing, or I guess you could say business behavior that you can set up within the system. If you see here, you see where I have gotten to a step here called finance. And after I was done with finance reviewed it, and finance looked at it, and finance sent it for approval, you see that it was then moved to a step called Finance Division Director. The reason you see Finance Division Director, excuse me, if I go to a view graphic, and you look at this large graphic within Unifier, you will see a couple of areas that have diamonds in them. So I created the budget, finance reviewed it, the PM may have done a budget revision, send it back to finance, they send it for approval, and finance decided to say, yes, we approve this, and they send it for approval. However, what does this diamond tell us? This is conditional routing. Because I've built in a conditional routing where if the budget or the dollar amount is greater than $1 million, when you approve this, I want this to go to the Finance Division Director for his approval, to be visible, for accountability, to know what's going on with this particular project. Because of that conditional routing, it routes it to the Finance Division Director, who then would route it to project controls. As this continues to move through the process, project controls then receives it and says, yes, I'm going to send this for completion. And because of more conditional routing, because this is greater than 1 million, the budget was 100 million, the program director received it for review and then is able to move it on to finance, and finance finally approves it, and it reaches a terminal state of the end step. And you can see that here, where it was sent to the Finance Division Director and Program Director review. If I go here to these particular steps, there is the Finance Division Director and Program Director review. Based upon the conditional routing, it took the path of going to those particular steps, of those, because it satisfied the threshold of being over the $1 million mark. And so it goes along that particular route that you have designed the business process or workflow to follow. This is very important for construction projects that are complex. They may have integration points they need to stop at. They may have thresholds and various business scenarios that can happen based upon a budget being approved, and it needs to be able to flow with some logical or real-time routing within the system based upon the dynamic changes that are coming and happening on a day-to-day basis within a project. So these are some capabilities that you do have within Unifier. I just did this for this process initial budget. You can do this for numerous processes, purchase orders, contracts, change orders. It's so highly flexible and customizable. You can have this implemented into various workflows and processes that you wish to do within the Unifier system. So to continue on, I now have an approved budget. And because of my approved budget, I'm ready to go. So one of the first things that I'm going to start to look at, I would then say, okay, so I have an approved budget. Let's look at my commitments. I am going to now go with my approved budget, and I'm going to roll with a contract that has been set up. If we look at this particular contract that has been approved for California Rail Builders, in my approved budget, there was a line item that was $50,000 for that particular WS item. I set up a contract for 50 million. The vendor I gave it to was California Rail Builders, and I did not choose a P6 activity for that, but you have the ability to do that as well. And I'm going to go back and show that. In the summary items, when I set up my contract, I decided that I wanted to have several items within here: engineering design, steel fabrication, and structural design. The contract value was $50 million, and each one of my particular line items within my contract, I set for 10 million, 20 million, and 20 million. As well as, I was able to do the cost breakdown and choose a particular cost code within that, in the setup. Engineering design. And you're going to see this cost breakout when we now move to the schedule of values. Once a contract is completed and approved, Unifier automatically will create a schedule of values within the system. The example what I talked about, perhaps before I move to that, linking the contract to a particular activity that you may reach in a P6 schedule. I go here and click create. And I move here. Because I have brought in the activity sheet from P6 for the Tulare Street project, it allows me to pick an activity that may be the reasoning behind, or this may be, we may be doing some sort of overpass or huge equipment grading, or some sort of, I guess you could say, maybe a huge generator install, and there's a contractor who is going to receive a contract to install 5 generators on the site. And there may be some sort of start or activity that is the start or milestone of that particular activity starting. And I may want to link that to this particular contract and say this activity is a reason or some logical reason why this huge contract has been written for $50 million. And you have the ability to do that. Through the built-in integration, you are able to bring in, and you can also see the actual dates that are brought in through the activity sheet integration between P6 and Unifier. So you have the ability to link that data as well. So I'll just quickly go back to my California Rail Builders project, using my contract. You see the contract has been approved. You see the summary items that were the line items. I chose engineering design, steel fabrication, structural design. I also gave them the cost breakdown and linked those to cost codes. Cost code 0101100. And now, since this is an approved, this contract is in an approved state. If I go to contracts SOV, it created automatically the schedule of values for this particular contract. And we can go in and see the breakout of that here within the system. It rolls up, and you're also able to expand it. And you can see I have done the cost code or CBS code and also the breakdown of the engineering design for each one of these detailed within the schedule of values. This schedule of values is then used and referenced when I move to my next process here. If I move to my payments journal entries, doing a pay app or payment application. I'm going to go into my payment application that I've created that is pending. I called it due to layer pay app 1. I selected my contract, CON 003. It has a referenceable hyperlink that you can go back and see these items. It will open up the contract business process within Unifier again that we just looked at, the line items, as well as the cost breakdown. I'll quickly close this BP, scroll down. You're able to set a pay app number. This is just data that I'm sending in. You can choose an invoice date, a payment due date. You could set retainage here, but I like to set it down in the line items as I add them. And if I go here to my line items, where you click add, I can simply go into the ones that I've already edited. And I expand my line items. I am able to set and see for my engineering design, my schedule value, which was 10 million, excuse me. I am asking for 5 million this period that you can enter in your different areas. If I wanted to change it to 4 million, I could do so. And if I scroll over to the right, I have my work retainage, typical amount for a construction contract, 5 to 10%. It is taking out the retainage percentage and is giving me my calculation based upon my current payment that's due minus my retainage, my total earns, and I have my balance to finish and what I need to pay, balance to finish plus the retainage that they would receive at the successful completion of this contract. I'll simply go back quickly here, change this back to 5 million. And now, save it, close the window. And now I'm going to take this payment application and I'm going to resubmit it in the workflow. Simple workflow process, not super complicated. Creation, review, revision, and it's going to move to the end. Again, should you want to create thresholds, a path based upon the dollar value, you could do that as well in the payment application. I'm going to resubmit it to myself. And moving along in the workflow process. Accept the task. Choose to approve this particular pay app and click send. And this pay app is now approved based upon the contract and schedule of values that has been outlined. Now, in walking through that, the scenarios continue to happen in terms of what happens as my project is moving through the process, things are happening. I may have some things may happen in terms of budget changes and things of that sort. So let's take a baseline and see where we are right so far. So I have a initial budget that has been approved of $100 million. I have contracts that 2 are approved, 1 is pending, but the total of my contracts is still up to $100 million. If we go here to the Central Valley construction program level, and I take a look at my total program budget, I'll scroll down here. And these are for various projects, but I can start to see an idea of the projects that are underneath my program. I am rolling up the budgets and the line items of what has been approved for my Tulare Street undercrossing. And these other projects that you see are the total of all of my projects within my program. And so you can see that my total program budget is $2,612,000,000. Also within my program budget, I'm starting to see an understanding and get an idea of how much is the Tulare Street undercrossing. What percentage of this project is my total of my total program budget? Right now, it's pretty minuscule. It's 3.83% of that entire program budget. And if I double click on it, it gives me the breakout based upon the description of work areas that were approved within the budget as well. How does this correlate and start to see? I should not have a total connection, a budget, a program budget, or I also should not have what I meant to say is contracts that are greater than my budget. How can I pay out more contracts, a higher value in contracts to people than the actual budget that I have to spend? So if I go back here quickly and I click my total program contracts and move over to another dashboard tab, I can see that the total amount of my contracts for my projects, all of the projects under my program, are also equal to $2,612,000,000 within my system. And you can see the contracts that have been awarded under the Tulare Street undercrossing. So you can have thresholds built into the system that when people are creating contracts, perhaps over in another project or something, you can have controls to where when this person is going to approve their particular contract, that contract should also not put them over their project budget, which in turn is the control of that project budget's control is also not letting you go over your program budget. So you set some threshold that you do not want to spend over your program. So you're starting to kind of start to see an understanding of how these things are dynamically linked. You're getting an understanding as projects are created, budgets are created, contracts are created. You're seeing that information roll up to the top level dashboard that could be in the executive suite that a director or a high level C-suite person can see to start to understand what's going wrong with their 200, 300 projects across their vast portfolio that may be all the way from California all the way to New York of different projects that they're managing and running. That is just one component of what I'm talking about in terms of we did with the budget and the contracts. Now I'm going to go back to my Tulare Street project. And I talked about changes that may happen. And I'm starting to get closer to the end, so we can also go back to questions. One quick area that may happen, you may have things that happen with budget changes. My project was going good, but I need to come back and ask for more money. So if we go here quickly to this Tulare budget change, I have decided to ask for an additional $50 million within my budget for my project. And for the line items, I am asking for different areas. Within my third-party contract work or cost code 02-02200, I'm asking for $10 million. The next one, project construction management, 10 million. Design build contract work, 30 million. Total amount, 50 million. We can see that my original budget was 100 million. I am asking for 50 million, and my final budget will be $150 million. I decided to say, when I did this, I linked this to an activity from the P6 schedule that may have been something that needed to be executed, that I may have received as an update from a scheduler or an updated schedule. And now this activity is telling me, hey, I need an additional $50 million to be able to complete this activity within my project. So you're starting to create the correlation of the linkage between these two things. Click accept. My budget change. I will click send. I'll approve my budget and move this on. This budget change is reflected within my cost sheet within Unifier, which is also recordable. If we look here, we can see that the initial budget, well, my initial budget is actually showing me initial budget approved. My pending budget revisions are, or approved budget revisions, where my budget changes approved and any budget transfers that approved. I just did a budget change. I just approved one. So now you can see that my revised budget, which is my initial budget plus my approved budget revisions, and you can see that I have added the money. The total is now $150 million based upon the money that I added to my particular budget. And you can click on a particular line item or number, and you can see the records that have affected or comprise and make up that. You also see another record in here. You see the initial budget that was approved of 25 million, and you see the budget change in which I added the 10 million to this particular line item, or CBS code, excuse me, 0101500. I'll quickly go back now and show you another component that you may be using to manage your program with. Once you've increased the budget, so I've increased the budget change, I said, okay, I've done that. All right, but I need to move some money. I've gotten some more money, but I think I'm okay. I'm going to move some money to another area within the system. Two-layer budget transfer. What do I mean? We look at this. I'm given a quick description. Transfer 10 million from design build contract work, and I want it to go over to the board approved contingency. We're going to use some money for something of that. I know an activity or something coming towards me in my schedule, activity DE 2030, and I'm going to use that for board approved contingency later on. I'll go to my line items. It needs to be a zero sum. If you see, I have taken and given board approved contingency $10 million, and I have taken, when you put a negative in Unifier, it comes within, puts it within parentheses, and my total amount cancels them both out, and it ends up being zero. And you can see, once you approve this budget transfer, it will then transfer 10 million from design build board approved contingency over to board approved contingency from design build contract work. Click send. I will approve this particular budget transfer, and that is approved. And if I go back to my cost sheet quickly, you will now see the approval. Project construction management, excuse me, contract work. Revised budget, we go down. Here it is. Let me find it again. I don't have it in here. Here we go. Okay. So we had a budget change, initial budget, and pending budget revisions. I'm looking, let's find that one. I may not have the column in my cost sheet showing that. And I think that's why. Yeah, I don't have a column showing that, the budget transfer. But the money has been moved over to my particular cost area here. I'll have to find what happened that was, because it was in my pending budget revisions. Because it was my budget transfers and budget changes pending plus my budget transfers pending. And if I made a column with particular formula, you would be able to see that. But that money has been moved over to my particular area here. Budget change. Original commitment. All right. I just need to set that up in the cost sheet. But again, to continue, on, you are able to transfer monies from one cost code to another as well within the system. And to show you, I guess you could say, an aggregation of all of this. So I've done finance, I've done funding, I've done contracts as well. I've done a budget. I did my funding. I did my budget. I've done my contracts. I have my particular schedule values, which I then link to a payment application as well. And those information is rolling up to the cost sheet, also to the particular dashboards. And in terms of that, how do we see some of this information? How do we see some of the granularity or detail of that? I'm going to go to an area here quickly called at the company workspace or enterprise level and go to user defined and take a look here at this particular report. And we're going to look at the program budgets report. If I wanted to see a report of all my budgets across my various projects, you have the capability to run a simple, this is just a UDR, and you can see what your breakout of your budgets are based across your different projects throughout the system for your program. And I am thinking in a logical sense, stands to see that my program's budget report should also be equal to my program contracts report. Or at least I would hope so in that sense. If everything was complete and executed, the total of my program budgets should also, total of my contracts should equal up to the amount of budget that I have to spend. And as you can see, you can pull different data points from these processes. You have project name, number, status, vendor name, amount. Now, one area I do want to show you that is very capable of Unifier, which is also adds a lot of its value in the robust reporting capabilities. If we look here at the program pay application funding detail, I quickly created this UDR so we could see the pay application and see some of the detail behind it. And I said pay application funding detail. You may have an instance where if you look at the line items for your pay application, you may be required to report on the percentage that you gave to a particular company. You also may be determined to report on a percentage that how much of this fund, how much of the fund, the federal fund that we gave money to, where did that fund go to? How did that money get paid? So we can see that $4,500,000 was paid in excavating from the third-party contract for Harrison Associates for cost code 02-02200. But how do I know that? Since I've linked that up, if I go back and run my program fund appropriations report. And this would be a simple I created this in 2 different UDRs. We were to create a data view. We could merge the data and have the 0220 Federal Trust Fund Project Development Fund that is at the company level. We could have that displayed here, the $25 million that was given to the Tillell Street undercrossing. We could have this data pulled over and plopped into this column, fund description and fund name, showing that that fund is what paid for this excavating item at the detail level within my payment application. And now I can calculate the percentage of money that I have given to Harrison Associates from that particular fund or federal fund, should I have some sort of contract rule or funding requirement that I have to pay a MBE or a women business enterprise or whatever sort of reporting criteria, and give them a certain percentage of a contract or funding. A certain amount from the fund must be paid to this company. So you can really start to get into some very granular reporting and capabilities as you're able to map the data across your various processes, since you are dynamically linking it together through the cost codes and cost categories and tracking your funding by your cost code and cost categories, and linking it to your contracts, schedule of values, and pay applications. So I wanted you guys to really, everyone to have a very high visual of that, see some of the reporting capabilities within that. If I go to programs, I am at the Central Valley program level, and I am rolling the data from my various projects up into my program budget, my contracts, and then of course you can go down to the project level and look at your different information as well. This is my fund appropriations and initial budget. Let's see. I wonder why it's not short. I'll go back to Classic for some reason. Strange. You can see it breaks out the initial budget by description of work, 100 million. And then of course, if I go to my contracts are also a value of 100 million. And I have my 2 that were approved, and I can go look at my 1 that was pending as well. So you have the ability to roll up your information in a manner that you see fit to you know, how you want to report based upon your reporting criteria, and also have that at the project level, and also roll that up to the program level should you wish to do so. So I have completed my presentation, and what I'm going to do is quickly kind of close before I turn it over to Dan to talk about some questions and answer some of the questions you all may have. What I talk about in the sense of why is this useful? Well, in the sense of you're using the project and the portfolio management capabilities of Unifier to track, distribute your funding. You're controlling your budget in real time with visibility in each of the projects as the data rolls up. I showed how under the program and your budget, the contracts can be dynamically linked, talking and update each other. And as you as a company and organization execute your program initiatives and your projects, you're getting the real-time data feeds fed into your projects, your budget. You're getting visibility in how your program is performing, what it's actually costing you at a high level. And you're able to make informed planning and funding decisions based upon the financial health of your program and your projects put together. So that's very dynamic and very powerful thing to be able to do within Unifier. And I open the floor now to any questions or comments that everyone may have.
Yeah, Kevin, good. Great presentation. We actually had quite a few questions come in, so I know we only have a few minutes. We may not get to all of them, but don't fret, our attendees. We are going to do a question and answer log that we are going to send out to everybody who not only attended today's webinar, but also registered for it as well, too. We'll try to get through as many as possible in the next few minutes. The first question that came in is, can a delegation of authority be included in items such as that $100 million distribution that you set up?
Mm-hmm. The answer to your question is yes. So in terms of a delegation of authority being done to it within there, you have the ability within Unifier to reroute the process or choose. There's several things you can do. If there was from the sense of the workflow, I'll go quickly here to Lair Street. If you had an instance where it had just been sent to the wrong individual, or you wanted to move it to another individual, you have something with Unifier called task reassignments. We're able to reassign a particular task to an individual, and you just quickly, and you can reassign that and send that to another individual to do that. But you also have the ability within the process to determine if there was an individual that, say there were 2 directors within the budget process and it needed to go to another person. You could also have that person have the other one set as a proxy, or you could have that one person reject the particular task and they could send it over, have it sent to another person within that group within Unifier as well. And the delegation, it would then be sent to them as well. So there's several ways in how you can do that. It would we could talk about the business caveat or need of the detail of how you would want to configure that particular scenario. But the answer, yes, that can be done.
All right. In the business process that you showed during your presentation for approvals, who is set up to approve? Is it up to the business process or the person setting up that business process for who can and who cannot approve?
So the person who is able to approve within the process, and I'll quickly go to a particular, I'll go quickly here to setup, business process. I'll go to the budget, or actually the initial budget. Each one of these particular workflows when the finance person receives this step of the workflow, the person who is in the finance group, or persons, could be 2 or 3, whoever picks up this particular task has the authority to approve and move it on, progress it on to the next step. You can create consensus where it will not move on until a certain number of people have approved. And what I mean by that as well, the person who has the authority, how do you set up who can approve? You put that person into the finance group, meaning that is their permission. And if I go here, you can see assignees finance. I have chosen the finance group on this step to be the ones that have the ability to approve at that particular step. And since that is permissions-based and permissions controlled, I would then determine the people who I want to be able to approve this. I would then take that person or persons and put them into the finance group based upon the members who would only be the ones in that group who would then be allowed to approve the process at that step. I hope that answers your question.
All right. I think we got time for one more quick one, but again, we are going to put this into a log for everybody because there was a bunch that were submitted. Is there a way of integrating P6 schedules with Unifier and pushing actual costs from P6 to Unifier, assuming that the schedule is cost and resource loaded?
The answer to that question is yes. And you said, is there a way to take the P6 schedule in P6 and push it to Unifier based upon the actual cost and actual resources that have been loaded? In this particular project here, if I quickly jump over to American Avenue, and I go to financial reporting, and I go to I have it here in EVM. You see our earned value analysis curve. This earned value analysis curve that you're looking at has actual costs. EAC, budget at completion, planned value, and actual cost. This is coming from P6 that has been calculated within P6 and pushed over. And I'm glad you asked that question, EVM. If I quickly go to the schedule manager here and I look at the activity sheet that we did here, done here in this American active project, and double click schedule type, if I scroll over, you will see actual cost that has been entered in P6 that was brought over based upon integration. And when you bring that information from P6 to Unifier, it hits the activity sheet. You can recalculate that, bring that into the cost sheet, as well as cost curves and earned value curves. And to quickly kind of give you the caveat to that, you see the actual total cost, 63,600 for activity, I think that was DE 2020 in the American Avenue project. And if I quickly jump over to P6 and I move to my EPS, and I close my I'll open up American Avenue quickly here. I'll open up the activities of American Avenue. And that was DE 2020, Design Engineering. We have actual total cost that has been entered here in P6, and through the integration between P6 and Unifier, where you can send to Primavera Unifier, you can send the schedule information. You can also send the Primavera, I sent the activity data. You can also send summary and spread data, and the schedule type is cost loaded, and bring that over to Unifier to calculate that information. And you have push and pull capabilities between the two systems. We are doing this through Gateway as well. So the answer to your question is yes. Again.
Excellent, Kevin. I appreciate you taking the time out and giving us this presentation today. I wish we had more time because, again, I have about 8 or 9 more questions that were submitted, but I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. Look forward to seeing you guys soon. We plan on doing a few more series of Unifier webinars in the coming months up till the end of this year. So again, thank you for attending today, and we're going to start working on the follow-up with the recording and the presentation materials, questions and answers to get those over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending, and please reach out to us for demos and questions that you would have.